All right, so there are times when I'm at the supermarket with my daughter and we're waiting in line to pay for something, and she'll look at the sign and she'll be like, "Mommy, why are those people famous? What did they do?" And I'm always like, I have no idea. You know, like they're on the cover of magazines, I don't know what to do. I am starstruck today with the people that are on this panel. These people are really changing lives and making a huge difference in the world, and I'm really excited for you all to get to know them a little bit more and to hear about their extraordinary films. So, without further ado, I just kind of want to get the ball rolling with having everybody introduce themselves, and if they happen to have a film in this amazing film festival, that they go ahead and share a little bit about what their film is about.
So my name is JP Eason. I am the course director in the experimental filmmaking course in the Film Production Master's program at Full Sail University. I do not, unlike the rest of the panelists, I do not have a film that is showing in the festival. I'm here to maybe add a little color. One thing that we do talk a lot about in our class is how do we make our films have meaning? How do we make them resonate with our audience? And it has to do with picking characters that are compelling, with telling meaningful stories, but also in terms of telling a story in general. And I think that all these films, the films that I've been able to see from the panelists here, have just been perfect examples of all that. I'm just honored to be a part of this.
Hi, thank you guys. My name is Jimmy Goldblum. I'm the co-director of Tomorrow We Disappear, which is a documentary. Oh, yes. No, please stop. And yeah, thank you. That's really sweet. It's a documentary about the Kathputli colony, which is the home to India's magicians, acrobats, and puppeteers. About 4 years ago, the Kathputli land was sold to real estate developers, and they were trying to move 2,800 artist families into transit camps in order to make room for the city's first ever skyscraper. And so we were there for 3 years, sort of documenting and in our own simple way, trying to honor the last years of this place. And I can talk about that.
Hi, I'm Julie Sokolow, the director of Aspie Seeks Love, a documentary feature. Thank you. And it tells the story of my friend David Matthews, who is a fantastic, hilarious writer and artist. And he's been looking for love for a very long time. He spent 20 years posting personal ad flyers to telephone poles around Pittsburgh, seeking a girlfriend. He wasn't diagnosed with Asperger's until age 41. So I chronicle his journey to continue to find love and to put out his first book and understand his diagnosis.
My name is this on? Is it on? Hello? Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I speak softly. My name is Chris. I co-directed Welcome to Leith. A documentary about a small North Dakota town in which a man tried to take over to bring in other white supremacists.
My name's Anthony Sullivan. I'm one of the subjects in the film Limited Partnership, which was produced and directed by Thomas Miller, who's a USC cinematographer. And the film is about myself and the wonderful man that I married in 1975, and we filed the first same-sex marriage court case in federal courts in the United States.
Thank you, guys. So Tony is sincerely I feel like he's a national hero, and he's really worked very hard, and unlike everybody else here who was a filmmaker, he was the subject in the film. So I just wanted to start off a little bit differently, but I wanted to start off kind of over there with Tony. How did you, because I don't know if you could tell, but they all told me that they were shy and they didn't like people saying nice things about them, and I was like, uh-oh, all I want to do is say nice things about you all. Tony said he was also very shy, and so many, intimate details are documented in this film, which, by the way, is playing after this at 1:15. You must all see it. It is an extraordinary film that made us weep, and lots of other people. It's really, it's beautiful. But Tony, if you can share a little bit about how you were approached by the filmmakers, why you decided to make the film, and what it was like to be watched and seen and documented.
Well, I live in Hollywood, in California, and we have a lot of wannabe filmmakers in that town, and Richard and I were approached over the years many times by people who want to make a documentary of our story, and we always turned them down because even though we lived a public kind of life, we're very private people. But Tom Miller arrived at our place because a mutual friend had asked us if we would see him, and he came with a chap called Leo Chang, who's another one of the producers on the film. And when I met Richard, who was the man I shared my life with, that was an instant meeting that within 24 hours we knew we were in the beginning of a relationship. And it was the same with Tom and Leo. Within 20 minutes to half an hour of them being at our place, we suddenly said, yeah, okay, you go ahead and make the film. It was a very wise decision because, as far as I'm concerned, no one could have told our story better than he did. And as far as the private part, he was so unobtrusive, even though we had a big film crew in our house a lot of the time, he was so unobtrusive, we found that we could just interact naturally as we do without being conscious of the camera. There's only one or two times that in the film that I know we were conscious of the camera, and so that's how it all happened.
Thank you. And I know that, so everybody that's here has made a movie that's kind of telling a unique story or coming at it from a unique political angle. And I know it's not always easy to take that political view or to make a movie that has meaning. So moving on to Christopher, do you mind talking a little bit about how you were able to connect with your subjects in Leith? And that's, again, for those of you that have seen it, I encourage everyone to see it, but it's pretty intense film, and it feels like a pot of boiling water that can explode at any time. So I just wanted to kind of hear the story of how you connected there and then how you were able to be in the midst of this very intense political story.
Yeah, so we just reached out to the mayor of the town first, Mayor Ryan Schock, and asked if you'd be interested or okay with having a small documentary crew come out there. And at that point, there had been a lot of news, international news out there, and he was like, yeah, come join the circus, basically. But we knew that we were in it for more of a long haul, and after meeting with him, he understood our intentions, that we did want to cover both sides, and that we were going to be speaking and spending time with Mr. Cobb, the white supremacist. And we did the same with Cobb. We did wait a little bit to contact him. We were a little bit concerned about him learning about our previous work, which deals with, like, our last film was about street dancers in urban East New York. So we thought he'd see that and then say no, because we weren't like-minded as him. But he did some research on us, and he agreed to let us document, and we basically had to do a lot of listening, and that's what our intention was. We didn't come at it at an angle in terms of I'm not an argumentative person, neither is my co-director, and we just told them we want to hear your side of the story, and we just had to sit back and listen and take it in, and that's basically what our process was in capturing what we captured.
Thank you. And Julie, can you share your story about meeting David and how that all started?
Sure, you might have heard me talk about it if you saw one of the screenings that passed, but long story short is David, the subject of the film, actually found me. I had seen him around town and had been intrigued, but he reached out on Facebook and said, I've seen your work and you should make a film about me. And that really helped with the ambiguity of, this idea of invading someone's privacy and coming in intrusively to film the most vulnerable moments of somebody's life, especially with David. He's offering up his love life, which is very, very vulnerable for a lot of us, if you can imagine going on a first date with a camera sitting right there. So I think that really helped, that he wanted to tell his story, and we found similar things with other people on the spectrum who we interview in the film, that they wanted an outlet to talk about dating specifically, actually, because with the autism spectrum, there's about a 4-to-1 ratio of guys to girls on the spectrum, so it's actually a pretty big problem finding a like-minded partner in life. And as we know, like, quality of life is just nothing without having, companionship. So I see the film as being like a funny, romantic comedy approach to advocacy, I guess. I don't know.
How are you able to convince the women on a first date to sign off the release form?
Again, like, especially like being a female director, like, I'm very conscious of like not wanting to make women feel uncomfortable and thinking about their place on the screen. And so I saw pretty much like everyone in the film as like a collaborator, and a lot of these women are highly intelligent. The women he goes on dates with are, like, one is a Carnegie Mellon professor in Chinese history, and she's from Germany and super intellectual, and she was just like fully on board, knew what was going on, and I think she thought it was like an interesting life experiment to have a first date on film, so.
That's very cool. So Jimmy, can you share a little bit about how you were able to find an artist colony outside of Delhi in India and decided that you were going to devote your time to telling the story?
Yeah, so I was reading a book by Salman Rushdie, Midnight's Children, which is like a seminal work of magical realism, and it took me so many times to get through that book, actually, because he's a very ecstatic writer, and he describes everything very ecstatically, some good, some bad. But it's like around like page 500 of that book, the main character Salim goes into a magician's ghetto, and I got to that section and I was like, what is this? Like, how did Rushdie come up with a magician's ghetto? It's so cool. And so I actually ended up Googling India plus magician's ghetto, and I found a little, like a 1-paragraph Times of India article about the relocation of the Kathputli colony. And I was like, one, it's amazing that this place actually exists, and two, it's, I think that would make a really interesting documentary, because it's such like an archaic, almost like mythological sounding place. I wonder what it's actually like.
So we can start with JP, but I kind of want to throw this question at all of you, which is how much pre-writing do you do before you go into this documentary filmmaking? And even for Tony, like, how much did you start to think, oh, I want to make sure I say that in front of the camera, or planning things out, or how much did you allow things to develop organically and everything in between?
In our case, it was very definitely developed organically. There were only about 2 or 3 times that we were specifically asked to move a certain way. The whole thing just evolved totally naturally.
I actually have my question. I think it's a wonderful question. I love this idea of the preparation that goes into going out into the unknown. I think documentary filmmakers so often are sort of have this intriguing possibility in front of them, and it really requires a sort of a leap of faith that as you enter into this process, that at the not knowing exactly where it's going, and also hoping that by the end you have something that's coherent, that you have something that actually has a resolution, because I've been involved in many documentary projects that we set out and then things didn't go the way that we kind of hoped that they would, and by the end we're like, well, there goes any idea of a narrative that we thought we were going to have, and instead of this being a feature, maybe this is a short, and so there's a lot of uncertainty about going in. So I guess to piggyback off Mylin's question in terms of preparation, because obviously you need to do the preparation to make a wise decision. To me, it's kind of like, at what point do you make that that choice that, what, I'm just going to go to India, I don't speak the language, and I'm just going to make this work? Like, where do you say, like, at what point do you actually go from this is an idea to I'm taking action on this idea? Because that to me is such a compelling moment of faith, right?
Yeah. I always think that for documentary, you should always have a really, really spectacular, well thought out, buttoned up plan, and just be willing to abandon it on day one, because nothing is what you expect at all. And so like I went in, you know, with this like magical realism novel in my head, and I like came into a slum, and my first encounter was someone like shooting up black tar heroin in front of me. So I was like, oh, things are going to be a little bit different than I thought. So I mean, I think like in my case, you know, what makes you take that leap? I think it's just I have no idea. I mean, I think you just I have this sort of like, I don't know. I live in like Greenpoint, Brooklyn. I was telling people that an expo center just opened across the street from me in what was formerly like a 1960s machine shop. And New York City is just like changing at this very rapid pace. And I think I'm like imbued with this sort of like romantic quality of like, oh, we might just be losing things in this process of creating the new. And I think that going and filming a magician's ghetto in India, if I can find a point of commonality with them, if I can like sort of like come at them as artists, artists working with artists, I think it would be a really interesting way of telling a story that's personally interesting to me, which is, what exactly is being given up in our sort of drive for the new. So I don't know. It's just, I just have themes that I can't get rid of in my mind, and I had to go explore them, I guess.
I'd like to expand a bit on my response. I didn't quite grasp what you're asking. Tom initially started to make a documentary on international or binational gay couples who were being forced to be separate because the immigration laws of the various countries didn't acknowledge gay and lesbian relationships. He started off with 4 couples, and in the process of making them, 2 of the couples broke up. And then the third couple, they got documentation through the foreign nationals' employment. So he was stuck with us, and he was making it out of his own money. And then the Bush administration came in, and he thought, well, this story's not going to go anywhere at this point in time. And so he put it on hold for a short period of time. And then he came back to us and said, he would like to carry the film with just us. He got interested in the issue because he went to school at USC, and there are a lot of people who are students from other countries at USC, and he met gay and lesbian people who fell in love with some of the foreign national students. And so this was it was an injustice he saw, and that was his initial motivation for making the film.
And I guess he also had the luxury of time, right? That he was
yeah.
able to put it on pause and then return to it. And
Yes, it was 14 years that he was filming us. Yeah. He's a very gentle, very quiet person, unassuming. And he, prior to being a filmmaker, he was actually an orthopedic surgeon, and he developed an illness himself, and he could no longer practice as a surgeon, and then decided to do filmmaking. And as I say, he's such a dedicated person. He's now on the faculty of the USC Film School, which is one of the greatest film schools in the world.
And we're all lucky that you two were the ones that were on the documentary, because if you want to see like 2 people just showing love towards each other on a film, this is definitely the movie to see. It's a really, really beautiful example of love.
So for us, the story was like a kind of like a news-breaking story, and we tracked it for a number of months. We originally thought the idea was crazy on the surface and just seemed really appealing in that sense. Middle of nowhere town, seemed like a Western standoff with these radical ideas in a town of 16 adults. And it wasn't until a few months later that Cobb got the first sort of family to move in with him. And then we decided at that point that it was worth going out there. My co-director Michael and I had saved up a little bit of money working in the industry, and just got a plane ticket and went out there, made some calls, and just made a leap of faith, I guess. We didn't know if this was going to be a short or a feature, what was going to happen, and we just stuck with it as the series of events unfolded, pretty much.
Aspie Seeks Love is my first feature-length documentary, and I think in my shorter work and this and what I'm doing in the future, I'm noticing a pattern of pursuing like character-driven stories where I kind of latch on to one individual and who I think I can like learn a lot from, or I want to spend a lot of time with, and someone who kind of represents maybe a group who you don't often see on screen, who deserves a spot on the screen. And so kind of starting from that point with like David, it's like, I have this character, I want to watch him and his journey, whatever that kind of turns into, and advocate for him and stay true to the story, but also like we became friends through the process and how that affected the film. I mean, one aspect was he puts out a book through the film, and he was a writer. He's 49 now, and he had never put out a collection of stories. He had written and revised, and it's part of his meticulous nature with having Asperger's that it was like he could never get to that next leap of putting something out. So I tried to encourage him, like through the process, setting him up with the Bookbinding Collective, and that became part of the story within the film. But it wasn't out of character, but there was an intervention component to the documentary.
So it sounds like at some point there's like you only have to be able to see what you can see in front of you, get there, and then hopefully you'll see what's next after that. Not worry too much about seeing the entire thing all the way. Jimmy, so I want to touch on something that was in your film that I thought was really poignant and for me incredibly powerful, which was the moment when one of the characters says, "Are we artists or are we just poor?" And it's so incredibly powerful because I felt like at that moment I was like, oh my God, it's like speaking to all of art, it's speaking to documentary filmmaking, it's speaking to, just so much, which is like a theme that I think you just brought up, which is like holding on to something and what matters. So I don't know, I just wanted you to speak on that and hear other people's thoughts on it as well. Just jump in as.
Yeah, I think right, that is the commonality that I'm talking about, which is like that sort of like amazing poignant moment where you like actually recognize yourself in your character, like in a genuine, sensitive way, which is very, very important. I think for me, it was like, it also relates to the other thing, which is like, documentary, there's no screenplay. Like when you're making a narrative film, you have a script and you shoot more or less to the script, and then the editing process is like, okay, like you're cutting more or less to the script. Documentary, you don't have a script. You have an idea, and then you go and you shoot a ton of footage, and then you sit in the edit room for what feels like forever, and you try to identify what your story actually is. And for me, it was like that the line that you're picking up on is like actually, that is the theme of the movie in my mind. It's a story about representation. It's a story about, this sort of like existential crisis. And I realized that like, that ultimately was going to give us our sort of narrative structure. Like, if we can like answer the question of like, how do these people see themselves? Like, how did they see themselves, and how does the government see themselves? And how is this event sort of catalyzing and precipitating that question and sort of taking it further? I realized that we would have something that I thought would be like really thematically poignant. And like in my mind, like, you can watch the movie and you can come away with either interpretation. I, for one, see them as artists.
Can I hop in real quick? No, so I really was struck by that line as well, and to me, I think your film represents in this wonderful way this idea that you have chosen characters, you've decided to follow them through this process of eviction, right? So we do have this sense that they have a clear goal, or at least they're wrestling with the idea of the desire to stay, but at the same time, there are so many. You said that you're kind of identifying this grappling with their own identities as maybe a theme. But I think what really struck me about your piece was that there were so many different themes, right? And that you at no point were really telling us this is the theme. You were just pointing at these certain aspects of these characters' life. For instance, the gentrification issue, which I think is sort of at the center of what's going on in your movie, which also has reflections in U.S. cities, which has reflections in developing nations around the world. Certainly we can say that that's a theme. We can say that, this struggle with identity, with being an artist is a theme. There's a multi-generational aspect to the film that I think is really, really powerful in terms of the passage. The younger people in the documentary, they say, well, I don't see what the big deal is. Or, maybe like the older generation is just holding on to something that it's time to go. And meanwhile, the older generation, they're coming in, they're screaming at each other. But I think that one thing that gives your film such meaning is that you do stay true to the characters, to who they are. You allow them to tell us who they are, and that and that the themes can kind of bubble up, and that ultimately there's a complexity to their lives that we see through the film, and our ability as an audience member to kind of attach ourselves to one or multiple of those is what all of a sudden allows it to kind of blossom and to become this really wonderful experience where you're never telling us this is what it's about.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. First off, that was amazing. So I hope I have a recording of that. I think what it is that, you know, your film, like for a film like ours, is, you know, it's plot driven. It's a plot driven film in the sense that there's a relocation that's happening and we're following it out. And ultimately, you know, you have to figure out, okay, like plot is what's happening in the external world, you know, whether it's a guy coming into your town and saying like, I'm going to set up a, you know, haven for white supremacy. Like that is the plot. It's happening out there. And subplot is the sort of thing that's happening inside you, which is like emotionally, this is who I am as a character. Like these are the things I care about. And like if your plot and your subplot don't intersect in a way, it just feels arbitrary. And so for us, it took a really long time to kind of be like, all right, like we know that they're artists and we know that they're, you know, that this thing is happening to them, but what the hell does it mean? And so like that was sort of like our journey as filmmakers. And I really appreciate you saying it's multi-layered because I think people are multi-layered.
Julian, I think that there's an identity issue that's happening in your film as well. I mean, I think in all of these films, so I won't want to get into all of them, but certainly, especially when David's talking about how Asperger's is no longer being put on the AM, what is it, AMA?
The DSM.
DSM, the DSM scale. And so suddenly, does it exist? What does it mean? Who am I? Am I going to get help? Who's going to be there to help me? All of these issues come up.
Yeah, so in the film, we see David who spent a lot of his life just being chronically misunderstood, and his parents were not very educated about mental health or autism or anything like that. And it was a while ago. He's 49 now, so he grew up back then. But he was put on Ritalin as a child for hyperactivity. They said it turned him into a zombie. They pulled him off of it. He was physically abused by his parents, definitely emotionally, verbally. It wasn't until he was 41 that he got an Asperger's diagnosis. Actually, a woman he went on a date with had autistic children, and she said, I think you need to get checked out because you remind me of my kids. And so all of a sudden at 41, I mean, up until that point, he had just been seen like all throughout college. He was called really terrible names that I can't even say what they are. You know, he was just bullied relentlessly, and basically just didn't know what he was. It's like, am I quirky? Am I different? Am I a loser? Or am I just an artist? Or what, you know, again. But, and to get this diagnosis at 41 and then come into these autism groups where I kind of follow him into these meetup groups, which are full of just wonderful people, but again, very different individuals, a lot of them extremely patriotic or religious, and David's neither of those, he's vegan. So he's an eternal outsider. And then 5 years later, Asperger's is removed from the DSM, and it's incorporated into the autism spectrum, which, you know, there's a lot of different opinions on that. I kind of let him speak to that point, which is just to say, for his perspective is that it might hinder people from accessing resources for that condition if it's less detected. So a lot of people have different thoughts on that, but that's what he's experiencing now. I know it's hard for him to make a living, especially in the arts, but yeah, so identity is definitely a theme in our film.
Well, and I love what you mentioned before, which was that you feel compelled to share a voice that maybe isn't being shared. And what I love is that there's no better way to speak about David than him. He was speaking about himself. And so we were learning about Asperger's in this completely unique way, which was that it's also very funny, witty, brilliant, charming, you know what I mean? All these other aspects of it that you can't kind of just say in a little write-up or that you wouldn't know necessarily. And as you mentioned, different, you know, it's a spectrum, so it shows up completely in a unique way. So that was a beautiful voice that I think you shared. And then moving along to Christopher, again, you know, I think all of us have a preconceived idea of what we would think when we would talk about a white supremacy group, and I feel like you did give humanity there as well, even though it was very hard to watch. I think that there was a lot of humanity there, and you gave a picture of different people and different identities. So what were your thoughts on that as you were going through, and how did you keep your own judgments out of the story?
Yeah, so from the get-go, that was our intention, was to not have ourselves as filmmakers step in and make opinions, basically. One of the characters in the film, Kynan Dutton, who's a Iraq War veteran, he ended up following Cobb out there, and I identified with him the most. He's around my age, and it seemed like he told us he had a bit of a troubled childhood. He was in a Mormon family. He was the black sheep. He got kind of disowned. Joined the military. It seemed like he was just always after someone to kind of maybe like a father type figure. He needed someone to give him something to do, some direction, and it just unfortunately was this sort of hate group. And maybe it was through music at that time. I think he told us he hung around some kids and they gave him a CD, and it was kind of this like hate rock music, and it just became a culture that he got attached to and springboarded from there. And then in the military, there's reports a lot of people coming out of the military are recruited by these right-wing groups. So yeah, I mean, and in terms of Cobb, he was a little bit harder for us to, it's weird to say that we wanted to humanize a white supremacist, but it was just really to understand these people and whatever, we just wanted to listen. And I just remembered now in the film Cobb, he reveals that he's like he has Asperger's as well, not quite as extreme, but yeah. So there's another recurring theme, but yeah. I mean, it was tough. It's tough to talk about these things, and then for it's all it's tough to say that you're humanizing white supremacists, but you come away with something different. I think for sure.
Well, I think the point is that we're just telling, you're telling stories, you're sharing different voices, and I think this is a town of 14?
16 adults.
16 adults is the town of Leith. So you guys increased it when you were there by 20%?
Yeah. It was hard to be, you weren't undetected when you were in there, for sure. So it was always weird, we'd film with, the Lee Cook's family who live across the street from Cobb. We'd be in their house half the day and we'd walk out and we'd see Kynan outside, and then we'd walk right over there and start talking with him, and they're watching us talk to them, and so it was always kind of weird in that way. There was nowhere to hide. We'd sometimes just drive a little bit out of town to get away from it for like an hour or so, because the county is like 1,600 square miles. There's like 3 or 4 other little towns within it, but you can't hide anywhere really. So yeah, it was,
And Tony, one of the things that's so amazing about the documentary that you're in is that you get to see, like you mentioned, it was throughout all these different years. So the way that your relationship was perceived at the beginning of the movie versus the way it was perceived at the end of the movie is completely different. And I'm just interested in you watching the movie and experiencing it. I mean, you didn't view yourself any differently. You're changing as a person, but you're still the same people, but yet people around you are seeing you differently. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on what that must feel like to see yourself through these different times and how other people were seeing you.
When I first saw the film, actually it took me quite a while to sort of sort out my reactions to the film. At first, I think, because, again, even though Richard and I were public, we were very private, I was sort of embarrassed, I suppose, is the word I use. But after seeing the film a few times, and I don't always watch it when it's screening, and anyone that sees the film will understand by the end of the film. But recently, it hit me, I thought, heavens, I'm very lucky. I have a 40-year relationship here, and I get to go back 40 years of my life. And actually, there's a couple of scenes when I'm a little boy in it, too. And I thought, people don't get to see that in their life. And so I started to view the film differently and to be grateful for it. The thing that I got most from the film, it's purely a personal thing, and I mentioned this to you earlier, I always knew how Richard looked at me and the love in his eyes. and by the way, we're each other's best friends, which is what makes the relationship really work. But you never know when you're in a relationship how you look at the other person. And it was very rewarding to realize when I saw us together that I looked at him with the same love that he looked at me, because I got such joy out of the love he looked at me, and it was sort of reassuring to know that I hope he got the same reassurance. But it is a strange experience to watch your life unfolding. I'm very grateful to Tom for the film. It could have been a horrible political rant. It could have been a horrible legal film. When you put yourself in the hands of a documentarian, it's a great trust, and it's a very intimate relationship. And he made a film that I don't think anyone could have made a better film of us, because he showed our relationship as it really was. And if for any of you would see the film, something I'm very grateful about it is that I was the loudmouth in the family and the noisy one, and the one who should go off at press conferences and challenge the government and just be a general pain in the neck. And Richard was always quiet, but I could never have been what I was without him. He was my strength. He was my whole life. And the film, people get to meet Richard. They get to meet him and see this wonderful human being that I shared my life with. I've evolved in all that since the film first came out. As I say, when it first came out, I was sort of embarrassed because, again, even though we were public, we're very private.
Thank you. So I guess one question, which is just to speak to the title of this whole thing, why is it worth making a movie that changes the world or that does something or that impacts? I mean, all of you have put yourself at risk in one way or another. And why?
I mean, I definitely did not set out to change the world when I began to make my movie. I was, I think for me, yeah. I mean, it's still weird. I mean, it's interesting because I was like, I'm very specifically not a social justice filmmaker, but my film, because we decided, I think, to take a little bit more of an intimate, character-driven approach, ended up having social justice ramifications, consequences. What's like a positive word? What would be a positive? I need outcomes. Yeah, I need a synonym. I mean, basically because of the film, because we were able to sort of renew interest in the Kathmandu colony in the New Delhi press, because they kept on referring to us as Hollywood filmmakers, which I think is really cute. But because these Hollywood filmmakers came and filmed this sort of community that no one cared about, we created a media storm, and we put a hold to the relocation, which is very bizarre. But I think when I talk about the social justice stuff, there's a quote from Jacques Cousteau that I always really like, which is if you want people to protect something, you need them to fall in love. And I think the thing is you can interpret that very romantically. And for us, it's you shouldn't romanticize your subject. It's very important not to romanticize your subject. But I think what it does do when you think that way is it sort of puts an onus on you, or puts a mantle that you need to live up to, that you need to sort of realize everything in your subject that is honorable and dignified, and give respect to that. And so for us, it really gave us a sort of drive to at least listen to our characters and really see the place through their eyes and see why they think it's valuable. And for that reason, maybe the audience will be able to see why it's valuable. And I think that, and it leads to understanding. In the same way that you're talking about humanizing a white supremacist, I think that understanding and empathy is so incredibly valuable across the board. Yeah. No, I mean, it's just if we stop sort of looking at people or perceiving people as another, and we have this idea that we should subject them to and push upon them, you just reinforce people's views that way. But if you actually come at them with understanding and openness, we can actually have dialogue. So I think it's really important.
And you completely undersold a key point there,
Right.
which was that in his film, there is a development that is going to take over this artist colony, and the film ends and you think this is what's going to happen, and he just said they have stopped that relocation. So
Very good. Yeah. I'm not talking anymore.
Oh, we're going down the line.
Yeah.
I just like film in general, and I think that growing up as like a little girl, just consuming tons of TV and films, and that's what spoke to me, and I, definitely overindulged, and kind of was very, very porous to a lot of escapist kind of media, and it felt good at the time, but a lot of it had, negative consequences for your self-esteem of what you're expecting of yourself in terms of, shallow expectations for women and for just people in general, love stories especially. Charlie Kaufman talks very eloquently about sort of the detrimental effects of sort of mainstream views of romance and relationships, and how that affects our psyches and our disappointments when we confront reality. So then being a teenager and experiencing independent films and documentaries for the first time, I mean, that changed my life. That completely took me from an alienated place and a lonely place to feeling connected. So that's why I guess I'm trying to make films too.
Yeah, Mike and I approached this in a unique way, and at first it was like a shock value thing, like, oh my God, this is crazy, is this real, is this kind of stranger than fiction type thing. But as we dug into the story, it got really interesting because of the kind of straight up use of democracy that was happening by both sides. And it was sort of like, and it became an examination of basically the extremes of how extreme democracy can go, and getting into the ideas of the First Amendment and what kind of speech should be allowed. A lot of countries don't allow hate speech, and how do you classify hate speech? In the freest country in the world, how do you deal with such extreme views like this? And who controls community? Who has the rights of community? Those things kind of percolated for us throughout the shooting process, and so we didn't really approach it as like this is going to be a social issue film. It just kind of happened that way organically, and I hope that kind of comes across. I think it does. We wanted to make an immersive film that played like a narrative, and then made you really start thinking and talking right afterwards, watching. So yeah.
Well, I have a thought. I think it's interesting that the title of the panel is "Making Meaning: Films That Change the World," which is just such a lofty goal, right? And it seems like when but when we start talking about the individual films that you've made, they're just so personal, they're so small that you feel like this idea that the world, changing of the world is almost unobtainable. But at the same time, by creating these connections, these human connections, by showing the humanity in your characters, by focusing on one story as opposed to this large macro view of an issue, it seems like each of you kind of are saying, well, I didn't set out to make a social justice film, it just kind of happened. By showing the humanity of my subjects, by really empathetically approaching the subject matter and helping, as you said, the audience fall in love with this individual as representative of this larger issue that sort of society is facing. And I think that one thing that Doc seems to be doing in an interesting way right now is taking lessons from narrative filmmakers, that they've been doing this for a long time in terms of using that single subject to be larger and more representative of a bigger cause. And to me, it is those types of, it might not be one documentary or one story that necessarily changes the world, but it feels like the accumulation and just being, seeing even these 4 stories and the power that they have. I think it's amplified even when they're together, and suddenly you can start to imagine the greater impacts maybe on the larger society. So, and it all comes back to empathy, right? It all comes back to this idea that if we care about one another, if we respect one another, if we can see the world through each other's eyes, that we're going to be bonded. We're going to care about the outcomes for the other. So I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's very well said. So there's this idea in physics that when you watch something, the experiment changes. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on that. Like, how do you think your being there or watching, witnessing, sharing these stories changed what actually was happening in front of the camera?
Who wants to start?
I think we had like the reverse effect of that. Soon after our first production trip, Cobb and Dutton went on an armed patrol of the town, and they used their own cell phone to cover it. And Mike and I, after finishing the film and watching it through, at different screenings, were like, wow, I mean, what if, and I started thinking, what if we were there when that happened, and what if we were standing over with them when they're like, we're going to go do this right now? And with Lee Cook standing across the street, how would he feel if we were still standing over there and not doing anything about it? I mean, so in that sense, not being there captured the most powerful part of the film.
But at the same time, do you think that his urge to capture it was because you had been capturing it before?
Perhaps. I think he thought he was protecting himself legally, because they do have open carry laws in the state of North Dakota, and even throughout the little patrol, he's always telling Kynan to get off other people's property and don't say anything, let me talk, all that kind of stuff. But Mike and I, it was just two of us there, so we were kind of able to blend in and make everyone else very comfortable. And the subjects of the films definitely like to unload on us a lot, and that got a little tiring for us, just emotionally and mentally. But we were certainly a conduit for the whole situation. Like we could have easily gotten wrapped into the story personally, and we really tried hard to stay draw that line, to stay on that line, and not get sucked in as subjects of our own film, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a neurotic Jew from New York, so I feel like if I weren't a filmmaker, I'd probably be like a therapist. And I think that we were sort of serving that role a lot of the time, actually, which is that, we interviewed them. I mean, we have like probably them answering the same questions 10 different times on tape. And what it was is that, when we first interviewed them, they had this sort of like script in their mind of how they perceive themselves, which is like, we are the living tradition. This is an outrage, like all these things. And they're, you can see in the delivery that this is like the 100th time you've said this out loud. And it just felt so inorganic. And we just kept on drilling them until they would open up. And I think it was that process of like, us being sort of like friends to our subjects, but also sort of like non-judgmental, and just like allowing them to sort of, look, if you want to talk to me about the fact that maybe you don't want to continue this art, maybe this feels difficult to you, maybe this feels like a burden that you're handing on to your children, even though your father and your grandfather and your great-grandfather all did this, but you're worried because the world is changing. If you want to talk to me about that, we can talk about that. And I think it's what gives it sort of emotional nuance, is the fact that we were willing to kind of continue to explore the same ideas until we got to a place that felt emotionally honest.
Yeah, so just to speak, I guess, how filming David changed things. One measure, I guess, is like this trip. Like he just left today, took a plane home, but yesterday we were contacted by a local autism school called the Paragon School, fantastic for young children on the spectrum. And David and I went in and we spoke to the kids, and they like saw some clips from the film and asked him all these questions, and like really looked up to him and asked him like about his book and how to make art, and like, David just felt completely like an outsider. He doesn't have kids. He doesn't want kids. And I think it was like, it's changing his life now because he's feeling that respect that he, and attention and being a role model. And he's really like living up to that and embracing that. So I think the film will continue to change his life. And I hope that, he continues to make books and to be an artist in the world. I don't know. Yeah.
That's great. So, we got to talk before this panel, so I got to hear a lot of how you guys, how you made these, as far as like raising the money and how you were able to get it, and I was just wondering if you guys had advice, if there's filmmakers out here, people who have an idea for a story that they want to share, a documentary. What is your advice for making that happen?
So I'll just kind of recount what we did for this film. We Mike and I were working as editors, and we wanted to make another film. And looking for stories, we found this story and tracked it. And then when we decided to go out there, we just self-funded our first trip. We went out there for I think 3 weeks. And you have to rent a car, hotel. We shared our motel room because we don't have any money, and didn't have that luxury of having our own bedrooms. But basically, when we got back, we cut a trailer with the footage we got, and we just put it online. And it got picked up, and it kind of went a little bit viral, and we started getting all this press based off this teaser. And through that, we linked up with a producer friend of ours who became very interested and helped us out with our second trip. So we didn't have to pay out of pocket, but he was helping out, and he became not an investor, but a partner. And then another trip we did, the last trip, these other producers came on board, and they helped us out with that one. And then for the edit, we did a Kickstarter campaign. And what's great about that is that it allows you to fundraise, but you build an audience. And we had over 1,000 backers, so we just then had built in 1,000 people that were invested in the project and wanting to see it come through, and that could help us out during outreach all across the country and across the world. We just use our own equipment. We don't own fancy cameras. We shot on a 5D, and I had to borrow like a lav and bought an expensive microphone right before we went out. But it was just run and gun and just do it, basically.
Nice. Anyone else want to share?
I mean, we had like a pretty similar approach. I mean, we self-funded our first trip also. We did Kickstarter earlier, and also we were very early in sort of the realm of Kickstarter. We did ours in 2011, so I think a lot of the rules as to how to run a Kickstarter weren't necessarily set up then. So we had a lot of like physical things. We like actually turned ourselves into a bit of like an e-commerce store for the Cathputli colony, which was great for them, but terrible for us. So like we came back with 9 duffel bags of like puppets and quilts and like all these things, and I had to like bribe customs to get back in the country. It was very ridiculous. But I think, so it was like kind of that like scrap and go sort of idea. And I was saying this to someone earlier, but I think like, so that's like the financing of it. You just kind of like you just prove to the world that you're good, and then like get enough money to go back, and then like hopefully just keep on proving until you somehow finish miraculously. But, I think in terms of like story, it's like you kind of have to know your role. So like if you're a shooter, you're shooting. If you're the sound guy or an interviewer, that's what you're doing. And so like you sort of have to pick your subject matter based upon like if you can't get something, if you can't get a crew together that's going to represent something, in like a visually pleasing way, then tell a story that doesn't require that. Tell a more intimate, character-driven tale, and like you don't need it. Like the story will be good; it will resonate in all the same ways. For us, we needed, it would have been a really bad movie if it wasn't shot well, if it wasn't technically at a certain level. I just think it wouldn't have played well. And so for me, it's like a lot of it was like, all right, I have a writing background, I know how to tell a story, and I'm going to find collaborators who, just broke up with their girlfriends, and maybe a trip to India would be like pleasing to them. And like literally 4 out of 5 people on my crew had just broken up. So I was like, let's go to India, all you broken men. And then we did that, and they slowly healed themselves through the process, except for 2. Yeah, I don't know. I'm done.
4 years ago when I started production on Ask B Seeks Love, I had a Sony Handycam, very cheap camera, and I just started running around filming David and didn't think too much about, making something super polished. I was just like eager to tell the story and do it as soon as possible and not worry about the gear and obsess over that. So a lot of what we shot was just me, one-woman crew, like a little Rode video mic on top of the camera. And then I think probably like 6 months into production, I started applying for grants when it started to get more serious. And so I did raise a lot of money through just like local foundations in Pittsburgh, Heinz Endowments, Pittsburgh Foundation. And then I was able to hire on a cinematographer like later in future years, a multi-year production this was. And down the road, about last year, it was like on my birthday, I had this really important meeting with a production company called Animal that they do commercial work, but they also do artistic documentaries like Blood Brother, which won Sundance in 2013. And I was just like, totally revering these guys who made this film. And I came with my rough cut and showed it to them. And they're like, yeah, like we see that this is a great story. And you know, they didn't seem to be bothered by my Sony Handycam footage. And, you know, they really helped to bring the color correction to it and mentor me through the whole process of pursuing film festivals. And I'm actually working on my second feature doc with them now with the C300. So getting my act together in that way. But for like a first-time feature filmmaker, like, shoot it on your iPhone, like just make work, you know, just get out there and tell a story, I think is the important thing.
That's amazing. I have lots of other questions, but I just wanted to open it up to the audience because I'm sure, I mean, like I keep saying to them, each of these people, we could talk to them each for like 5 hours straight about their story and their movie. Does anyone have a question? Oh, and there's mics are being pointed to over here. So you walk to those mics and then we can ask a question. Hi, Peter.
Hey, Marlene. Hey, JP. I'm Peter Gordon. I also teach in the Full Sail MFA film program. Just really glad to see all you guys out there. I wanted to ask a little bit more about, you asked the question I was really interested in, which is where they get the money from. But also, these projects took years to do, so what were you doing in between? Was that where you were making the money so you could afford to keep going? Were you working on other films that you're working on now? How do you fill the rest of your time when you're not doing this particular passion project?
Can I just say he teaches the business of film class? So, yes.
I'm a hedge fund manager.
Best thing to be, actually.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's terrible. No, I mean, look, you know, for your first film, like, I think you kind of have to be, whether you know it or not, you sort of go all in, I think. And you're like, I'm going to be broke for several years and just figure this out. And so, like, it was a long process of, like, applying for grants and, like, you know, we did our Kickstarter. And then on the side, like, hopefully I would get a commercial or I would, you know, I would write something. I would, like, write articles for certain magazines just to, like, make money. I mean, now that the movie is done, it's a lot easier for me to get commercial work, which is, like, a much more sustainable way, I think, of, like, balancing this stuff out because, you know, you can work, yeah, I would say like a commercial that I did recently had, you know, it was a 1-week production and it had more of a budget than my entire feature. So I'm not like a huge fan of just specifically focusing on commercials, but I think it's important to like have another track by which you can make money. You know, people are teachers, people are editors, people are writers, you know, it's just, you have to have something because documentary is not going to be your bread and butter, unfortunately. I think, unless you're awesome or better than me. Tell me how to do it.
I live in Pittsburgh, which is a very affordable city to live in, and I have a very, like I basically live my life around filmmaking. It's kind of like, so, you know, finances come second to me. Like, if I wanted to spend more of my time doing quality work, and not taking on other jobs. So like I'm willing to just like, okay, I don't have to own property or own a car to do that. And that's cool. Like that's how I'm gonna live my life. That said, like I had, you know, some nice freelance gigs doing short documentaries. I had a stipend to do a documentary series called Healthy Artists on the plight of uninsured artists in America. And just got very fortunate with like kind of scraping by on grant funding and freelance and doing work that I find valuable as much as I can.
So our film actually only took a little over a year to make, which is insane. But but I was in between production trips. I was actually finishing editing someone else's feature doc, and so that helped me out a little bit. And I have a strong editing background, and that's what I can easily get. Well, I'm not bragging, but I can get jobs editing if I need to. But my co-director and I are trying to kind of break into commercial world as well, as you described. So yeah, I mean, taking editing gigs. I have a great community in New York of doc filmmakers that are always looking for a week here, a week there of work on their films or whatever. So I try to just get whatever I can, and I don't have any other job. So basically, it's 100% film all the time.
And you sold your film.
Oh, and we were able to fortunately make a pre-sale of our film to PBS's Independent Lens series when we found out about Sundance. So that they helped us finish the fine cut and get it colored, mixed, and helped us actually get out to Park City. It's very expensive. So, and then part of that is also helping us fund our next project. So that was helpful.
Tom's not here, but I can say a bit about this. He started off with having to pay for it himself, and that sort of reached the point where he didn't know where he was going to go. Some people independently contributed when they thought of saw what he was doing, but like you, Independent Lens came through for him at the end and made it possible for him to finish the film the way he wanted to finish it.
I think it's important, if there are any students here, to just, it took a while for us to start winning grants. Like, it took a while. And I think, like, you shouldn't assume that you're going to beat people for grants who have, like, footage to show and also probably other projects that they've done. So there is really a lot of onus on going out there and finding a way to shoot and edit material and prove to the world that you have something valuable. That's when you're going to start winning stuff, not in those nascent stages. It's just, I think it's good to know that.
That is good to know, and I just want to add, sorry, I know that you guys are waiting for questions, and I promise we'll get to you, but it's just that both of you brought up the PBS, Independent Lens. I just wanted to talk, there's a lot of controversy right now that PBS is putting attention towards Downton Abbey and some of these other programming, of course, because it's doing very well for PBS, but they're kind of taking away some of the money towards documentary and independent filmmaking that's changed the world, that's made major changes in policies and things that happen. So, I mean, I don't know if there's anything you guys want to comment on it, but it seems like it's an important place that we need to make sure that we keep attention towards independent filmmaking and documentaries.
Yeah, so we're not going on the air till spring 2016, so we'll probably be directly affected by whatever the outcome is, and we're hoping that
they're changing the night that they're
the night.
to give
So
content.
they're changing. I'm looking at my co-director to help me if I screw this up. Sundays. What is it? So they want to switch to Sunday from Monday. Monday is like a Monday night primetime slot, and they want to switch it to Sunday on so in New York, it's WNET is like the major one. They want to switch it to their sister channel, which no one really watches. Mm-hmm. And you also lose out for like Emmy consideration. You lose out on that primetime nomination if you are lucky enough to get that. So there's a campaign out there. I can't remember off the top of my head what it's called, but if you Google it, they have a mailing list, and they're basically doing a tour right now through different cities, having talks and trying to basically raise awareness for that shift and why it's important to not change.
Yeah. Just wanted to point that out. Go ahead.
I have a quick question for Jimmy and Chris specifically. Have your subjects seen your film yet? But a longer question for everyone. Do you worry about how the subjects feel about your film as you're making it, as you're cutting it? Can you separate what you want to do with your film from, oh my God, I've lived with this person for 4 years or whatever? Does it really affect your filmmaking, what the subject feels?
Good question.
Actually, it was, Tribeca was able to fly out Poran, the puppeteer of my film, to the opening, to the screening, the world premiere, which was so amazing. And he actually got to meet Salman Rushdie, and Poran had made puppets of me and Adam, and Rushdie was playing with the puppets, and it was very bizarre. It was just like, it was such a weird, surreal moment. I was like in the metaverse. But yeah, and he got to give a speech at Tribeca, and it was just like, it was so awesome. And the thing is like, I think it depends what your movie's subject is, personally. Like, if my characters hated my movie, that would be a real problem for me. Because ultimately, my film opens with Poran giving a tour of his house, and he's specifically asking me to make a video of his house, so when it's destroyed, he'll have a memory of it. And then if he watches that movie and goes, that's not my life, like, I would feel really terrible about myself. I can imagine other scenarios where you're filming people who's maybe, like, morally you don't align with them as much, and they'll watch it and say, like, that's not me, you know, or that's unfair, but maybe they just don't like themselves or don't recognize themselves. But I think it really is sort of, you know, sort of plot and character dependent. For me, it was they have seen it and they all really, really appreciated it. And that I think there's no better testimony. Like, I don't care about any of the reviews. I don't care about any of the awards. Like, the fact that they like it and they feel that it respects their lives is actually all I care about.
Okay. So we were lucky enough to get Mayor Ryan Shook and his family out to Sundance, and because of scheduling and how fast the film came together, they hadn't seen it before, so it was a bit of a risk for them seeing it in public for the first time, but they loved it, and really only planned on doing one Q&A while they were there, and then decided they wanted to come to all the screenings and do all the Q&As. They got a great reception. They felt that we really made an honest piece and really showed the world what they were going through from their perspective. Other people in the town, like the Cooks, and this guy Greg Bruce, who's kind of like the renegade journalist out there, have seen it as well, and they liked it. Cobb has not seen it yet. He's on parole in North Dakota, so he can't leave the state. We don't quite feel comfortable sending a bunch of links out to people, so we're trying to make time and figure out how to get him to see it in a little bit more of a controlled environment. I think he's been tracking the film. He's been tracking the reviews. The reviews have all come in and been kind of like favorable towards him, not in the sense that like they love him, but that just talking about how even-handed the film is, and I think he really understands that and appreciates that. I'm sure he won't like aspects of it, but no one will like every little detail about a film. So I definitely felt like in the edit more so conscious of what to put in, what to not put in, how is this going to show someone, is it doing justice, is it not doing justice to the character, to the person, to how we felt when we were there? Has it changed since we shot it? So it's a little bit of a dance to kind of tell the story, but also to be truthful to them.
I think you heard earlier about how I reacted to the film, but Tom, when he was making the film, we came to an agreement. I paint, and I don't like anyone to see a painting before I finished it, because someone comes into your studio and just a flicker of an eye can make you think, oh, you know, and affect the work you're doing. So I didn't see the film till it was completely finished. That was agreed upon between Tom and I, and I'm really, really glad that I hadn't, not because it was bad, but because it was good. But that was just the way we handled it. And in fact, the version for Independent Lens, which is going to be screened, I believe, on June 15th, I haven't seen that yet. It's edited out like 20 minutes to make it fit the format for television. But that was the way we handled it. And it turned out that not only did I want to do it that way, but it turned out that Tom prefers to do it that way too, because then he's free to do what he wants to do, as opposed to being affected like had I seen it while I was going, saying, oh, I don't like that scene, or what, you know. So that's how we handled that situation.
Did he seem relieved when he saw your reaction to it?
I never sort of asked him his reaction to it. We had a very interesting, we just worked together very, very, very well. And evidently we both had confidence in each other.
Yeah, I think, you know, the word of the day has been empathy, and, you know, like while editing, you have 100 hours of footage, like with my case of David. Of course, I've seen him at his, you know, a lot of high points, a lot of low points. And so as you're constructing the story, yes, you want conflict, you want a balanced, you don't want a puff piece, you want it to ring true, but you have to be reminding yourself every step of the way, you know, of putting yourself in that person's shoes, I think. And so you can feel yourself stretching across that divide and trying to get into the head of that person. But it's worth it at the end of the day, because, yeah, the biggest endorsement for the film is David liking it with Aspie Seeks Love, for sure.
And we see with so much reality TV, it's the exact opposite. It's the exploitation of that, right? And like having all this footage and using the worst possible things you could use to showcase. So who's up?
Ron Clark from Carterville, Illinois. I'm in my second day of doing something I have no knowledge called filmmaking. And it's the story of 6 kids that create 7,000 jobs on $4.80. And there is a documentary aspect of it that I'm looking at, plus the TV show, the film, and all that. And it comes from the fact that a gentleman named Musk, who owns Tesla Motors, received $1 billion to create 6,500 jobs. So our film is taking 6 kids who create 7,000 jobs with $4.80, and we teach you how to leverage and how to develop. My question, actually, I was sent here to meet Full Sail along with Jimmy and Chris. That was the limit of my duties for today. And the idea is how would you go from a project idea to find the people of value that you need to fulfill changing the world? I'm one of 70 million baby boomers. We have more money than time. I retired 20 years ago. I've given away half of my fortune in the last 20 years, and it's bigger today than it was 20 years ago. So my problem's not money. My problem is finding the right people who care about changing the world. And there's 10,000 of us retire every day.
You may have a line of filmmakers coming to speak to you in a few.
Well,
How much money? No. No, there.
the third phase of the project is television's first $1 billion show, in which Florida will play the Netherlands, Texas will play Australia. Every state will have a country it plays. Who can create the most jobs on $100 million? So that'll give you an idea of what us old baby boomers have got in the way of money. And most of us, we're just looking for a place to put it. I'm going to open up 1,000 accounts with kids and double their or triple their interest, match their money for 6 years. And when they graduate, complete school, finish the project, they'll have $80,000 in the bank, debt-free, and they can do some things with their life.
So I think that, I think that the question in there is, with this idea, where do you begin, or where do you find
I gave
the
Chris my
story?
card. I didn't get a chance to get with Jimmy. But I'm saying if this is a subject matter that somebody's interested in learning about, we're going to be filming here. And Monday night, I think I speak at Full Sail evening after a show that you guys do, and we'll hire some of your students. But we got to build feeder systems, because all what I see as a business person is if the why is big enough, the how will come. My job is to throw gas on the how and speed up the process. Because at 67, you don't know how many more days you got left. And the model that I grew up with doesn't appear to be there anymore. I grew up with a different world in the 50s. So
Yeah, I think, I mean, I graduated in 2008, right into the recession, and I was lucky enough to have like this weird intersection of a filmmaker coming to Orlando to try to make a film, and I helped her out and landed at in an internship in New York, and they produced her film, and I had no idea, and then they hired me, and then I was editing for them for years.
what
But
you guys have basically said is ignorance on fire is better than knowledge on ice, and yet you had the knowledge, but you jumped around and did some crazy things, not knowing the unknown. The future
Yeah.
is not planned, except for people like me. I planned my future.
Yeah, I don't have a plan. Well, I'm trying to have a 401k maybe soon. I just got insurance.
Well, I gave my I gave my telecommunication company away in 1995 and retired. And instead of taking cash, I took a percentage on every phone call. And that allowed me to make 10 times more money giving my company away than selling it. And so it's hard to get people to comprehend the principle of giving. They don't believe they're going to get it back.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for
Sure.
your support of independent film and for your idea, and we really appreciate you. And thank you for your question. Does anyone else have a question? Okay.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lisa Mills out of UCF, and we make documentaries too. And I made an award-winning film about teenagers, and I'd like to speak to you after this session is over. I want to let everybody know that the website you need to go to save independent lens and POV is indiecaucus.org.
Thank you.
This is a very terrible time for documentary on free television in the U.S. You have no idea how difficult it is to get television distribution for an award-winning documentary on public television. So indiecaucus.org, please go there, help us save independent lens and POV.
Thank you.
I'm looking at the title and I'm seeing Making Meaning, Films That Change the World, and I'm thinking of it as an actor, and how we approach our characters is the same as a documentarian, sort of, you know. And I'm wondering, I keep hearing the love in the room, and I think this is all about love, telling stories, you know, telling stories and people, that's what we are. And this man over here who has what he has and wants to give, can you tell me or talk to me about your opinion on that? And is that really how we can change the world? I mean, it sounds so simple, but it seems so logical right here. Not on all the films, but in here, it's definitely palatable.
Okay, look, I think that love is an incredibly powerful force, and I think that empathy is an incredibly powerful force. I mean, like, my characters would frustrate the hell out of me, and like in you know, what you would do ultimately is think about that, like what part of myself is kind of being frustrated by you, and it's like a sort of interesting, like, introspective journey. I think in addition to love, I know a lot about Indian politics. Like, I have researched this a lot. I have read a lot of books, and I'm not saying that to be like, I'm so smart, but like, I think it's important to be like, you need to know your shit too. And like, the truth of the matter is like, there's a huge context to the conflict of my film. Like, you're talking about $5, you know, they're making 300 trips. The reason why New Delhi is able to boom, and the reason why people are making billions of dollars, is because next to New Delhi is Haryana and Uttar Pradesh, which have a population of 300 million, roughly the same size as the United States, that make $5 in a year, okay? So the real estate sector, the manufacturing sector, the engineering sector are all able to benefit from that working class that comes to the city, builds slums, builds everything they need to build, and then they raise the slums and they move back to the villages. And the fact of the matter is like, I just think that like me loving my characters and appreciating them and understanding them is a great entry point into how to tell a story. But if you also don't have political context for what you're doing, it's going to come off naive. And so I just think that's important to also balance out that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've all seen a lot of documentaries that have also been, you know, very dry and lacking that quality. I think a lot of us are informed by our interest in narrative filmmaking and bringing that style to documentary, and so maybe that's part of it. But love is a big subject. I'm going to hand it over to Chris now.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
Yes.
If
That's
you
a
don't
very
like
good point.
if you don't like your subject matter, then you should stop immediately, because you're going to hate it 2 years later, 3 years later, even more, and the work isn't going to come out. So yeah, I mean, you absolutely have to like what you're doing, because it's not going to work otherwise.
It's a good trap at bringing you into the world, and then you're stuck and you have to finish.
Also, the subject has to like the filmmaker.
Yeah, that's true.
That's right, and the subject has and I think like one of the things that we're always teaching our students is that, you know, whenever a student comes to us and they're like, I want to make a movie about this theme, we're always like, oh God, oh no. Because when you make a movie just about a theme to begin with, it tends to be unwatchable, or can be unwatchable. And I think what everybody did, and I think that JP was talking about this, is ground it, root it in a story, ground it in something real, give it context, passionately pursue, you know, go in full force, passionately pursue the world of it, and then that little gem, that little soul piece, that theme can come through, but it happens organically. And I'd like to point out, because we talked about this earlier, they have each put so much time and everything. You know, this is another thing students always ask, what do we need to do? And it's like, go all in, put it all there. And we were joking that they should each have PhDs in their respective, for their documentaries, because it's the same amount of time in a specialized niche topic. So, yes. So I think that there's another question.
Yeah, I'm Nelson, a Full Sail student here. Thank you guys for being here. My question is very simple, but yet a little bit difficult. It's a simple question. What's the most common mistakes you find people make when they're making a documentary?
Good question.
Not giving up on that plan they came in with. Like, assuming that the story you went in with was the story that you were supposed to tell. And I think that, you know, I think the best documentaries, not across the board, but ones that like aren't tracing an event, so take longer periods of time, like ones that unfold over years, like what happens I see is that you come to a rough cut and you fall in love with that rough cut and you're like, I have a movie. I hated this for so long and there's a movie. I made a movie. And then to assume that that movie is your movie is a real problem. I mean, like, if you look at M. Night Shyamalan, like on every screenplay that's written on a narrative screenplay, you have the draft number. Look at how many drafts he did of The Sixth Sense versus how many he did of Unbreakable versus how many he did of Signs, and you'll get what I'm talking about. Like, you have to be able to revise your work, and I think you have to be able to revise your ideas and remain open-minded, and that's how I think things get really good.
I can actually speak to this just a little bit because I work with students every single day who have a vision. They want to tell a story, and the students who decide to make a documentary in my class, and I know that I've struggled with this a bit in the past too, is that a lot of times what they'll do is they'll go out, they'll find a subject, they'll find compelling content, and then what happens is that they make the film that they think their subject wants to be made of them. So basically what ends up happening is that they're kind of creating a piece of propaganda for the most part. They're kind of, they're sort of making a promotional video for this person or this group or this cause, as opposed to trying to step out and be independent and trying to, make those hard choices, right? And see the bad and the good and create that balance and to have an even-handed approach. And it seems so simple. Oh, well, I'll just take control of my own story. But, a lot of times what happens is when you try to find a enigmatic, or a charismatic lead character, someone who already has an idea, a vision of what they want to create in the world. And it's really easy to get, your story to get kind of co-opted and pulled into this already moving machine, right? So, that's a problem I see a lot. And ultimately, you have to resist it, right? You have to be able to figure out what is the story on your own terms. And I think a lot of the answer to that is to return to a narrative structure. As long as you have a story, you establish a goal. What's your character's goal? What are the obstacles in their way? How do they overcome that? Do they achieve their goal at the end, right? And then suddenly you say, okay, that's a story. That can be a doc. And, what did they learn in that process?
I think it's also, I agree with that very much so, but I also think it's important to come back to your point of view. Like, I have these amazing scenes of Puran, my main character, giving me directing notes where he's like, I think the music you should have the sunrise, and then the music will be like, look, ah, and it's just like, it's like the best. And he hadn't seen the movie, but like, also just, like in the way that they would talk about things, you get really lost in it, and you have to like give yourself a break to step back and be like, do I actually believe this? Like, does this correspond with my point of view? And I think that's like a constant fight. So I think it's a really good point.
I love the idea that everybody has this like secret vision of the documentary of themselves and tries to tell the director what it should look like.
Oh yeah, it would have been so bad. He's great, but it would have been really bad.
There are so many contradictions. It's, and so much of it, like, if you're doing a character-driven doc, it's like, you don't want to make this propaganda piece that's just a love fest. I'm thinking with David, like, I don't think we did that. I definitely brought, like, my own, like, artistry and, like, sense of humor and personality to it, and he had his. We jived well, and, like, there were moments where I think that he probably felt self-conscious. Like, there was a part in the film where he talks about masturbation, and he kind of, like, once he saw it, felt uncomfortable about it. A couple of the local newspapers were like, did that go too far? And so there's, like, moments of friction, but you work it out. It's like being in a band and having those moments. But I think one thing of advice for I don't know, young filmmakers or something. One, get good sound. Always prioritize getting good sound over good visuals, perhaps even, right? It's harder to listen to abrasive sound than
I'm
than it is
actually
to
a sound
watch
guy,
it.
sorry.
Yeah.
What's up?
He's a sound guy. That's why I was playing it.
Yay.
Yay.
And other than that, I actually had a film that I worked on for about a year and a half that I thought was going to be my first feature doc. It was a character-driven documentary about a very brilliant but troubled schizophrenic poet, avant-garde publisher guy. And we were friends, and that project, I probably filmed 100 hours for that, and that didn't happen. You know, there were conflicts between our personalities at the end of the day, and you have to be able to fail. You have to have failed projects and get resilient and get back on the horse. So I'm sure these guys have failed projects too.
That's great advice. I think that's excellent advice, that you have to have failed projects. You have to be okay to fail and have those lying around as well as the successes.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of covered everything. This was my first time directing, so I feel like I don't really have, I don't have the authority to speak on this, like what mistakes, because I'm still learning. So, but yeah, I mean, you got to learn how to fail, and everything else they already said they covered. I think all that.
And you'd mentioned earlier that you didn't want to edit certain characters out of your film.
Yeah, I had to learn because so I came up editing, and at the very end there's a set of characters in the film that they were my babies, and right up until we had to find lock picture, I cut them, but I knew for a couple months that we needed to cut them, and I just refused to cut them. And so you have to let go of babies, I guess.
Yeah.
What you
Kill
gotta
your
do
darlings.
to serve the narrative.
I think what was said about the propaganda is very important. And one of the reasons I think our film worked is, as mentioned earlier, I didn't ever see the film. We didn't have that enter. Tom made his vision. Had he made the vision that I always had of the film we made, it wouldn't have won an award. No one would have gone to see it, and it would have been a boring polemic. Yeah, I'm total agreement about that. It has to be the filmmaker's vision, the filmmaker's film, and the subject has to be comfortable enough and try and avoid. I mean, for someone like myself who was involved in civil rights for years, of course the idea to preach is there, and that would have totally ruined the film. So I agree with everything you're saying.
I don't believe it at all. I think you're charming, but anyway.
Oh, me?
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry, one last question.
That's okay. I feel like a deer in the headlights here. This question is for the filmmakers. What documentary filmmaker influenced you, and what narrative director do you admire?
In 1 minute or less.
Okay, Terrence Malick for narrative, and I can't name a single documentarian. Ross McElway, Barbara Koppel, Errol Morris, Albert Maysles. I could keep going, but I'll stop.
I'm going to give it one answer for Terry Zwigoff for Crumb and Ghost World. Both.
Yay. Nice.
My friend Jeremiah, he's like 5 years older than me, and he made a really beautiful film called In a Dream, which is a great documentary about his father. And he was very, very helpful for me throughout the process, so I would definitely give him credit. And then on the narrative side, there's actually this Studio Ghibli animated film called Pompoko, which, if you haven't seen it, is about raccoons who are being displaced from their land outside of Tokyo, and they all have magical powers. And it's a deeply sensitive, amazing, emotional film, and it was actually very influential, so yes.
All right. Well, I think that is it. Thank you guys so much for your time, your sharing your wisdom, your heart.